most people, when they think of AUKUS, think of the Defence Department as having the lead, but I'm assuming our mission in the United States has a key role. Secretary, could you just outline what the role of the mission in Washington is with regard to AUKUS?
Thank you. The various of our missions would have responsibilities with aspects of the AUKUS partnership. For example, our mission in Vienna, as well as London and Washington, but even more generally. The role of the embassy in Washington would be obviously to pursue Australian objectives with respect, with things that or issues that we're working with the Americans on.
Sure. So one of the key issues there is in the statement that both the United States President and our Prime Minister made is with regard to Australia being regarded as a, quote, domestic source within the meaning of Title III of the US Defence Production Act. And I'm just wondering, has our mission there had any briefings from the US, either the administration or congressional contacts, on the drafting and timing of any legislation that may be amended to enable that?
Senator, I know that the embassy has been active on that issue with the administration and the Congress, including in the lead up to the expected visit of the President of the United States. In the specifics of your question with respect to legislation, I'm not sure. It's probably part of it, but please, Mr. Subject.
Yes, Senator Peter Subchuk, First Assistant Secretary for US and Indo-Pacific Strategy Division. This perhaps is more of a question for Defence. Certainly in the past, this is one of the things that I know Defence has been active on in relation to activating or giving better effect to our inclusion in the US national technology and industrial base, with which I know you're familiar with, as one vehicle for ensuring Australia gets an even playing field in terms of engaging on US contracts in relation to US companies, especially in the defence sector. So that's been a long-standing ambition that Defence has been leading on. But a positive outcome that we had from the bilateral meeting between President Biden and the Prime Minister in Hiroshima, and was reflected in the joint statement that came out, was the President's undertaking to explore with Congress the possibility of Australia's inclusion under Title III of the Defence Production Act as a domestic source. The only other such country that's included in Title III is Canada, and that, of course, would open up opportunities for US co-investment, for example, in Australia, and Australia also being considered, as you noted, a domestic source in terms of applicability of US government funding and grants and related concessions.
So I guess I'm conscious of the history, though, that with the NTIB that you mentioned, that the past Senator John McCain was heavily involved in fact, basically led and sponsored that action. There were groups of both congressmen and senators then who wrote open letters to the House and Senate Armed Services Committee opposing that. Have we seen any similar opposition, and have you received briefings as to the status of implementing the undertaking that the two leaders announced recently?
In relation to the last part of your question, Senator, no, I haven't. That announcement was made very, very recently, of course. And as for past engagements in relation to our inclusion in the DPA, that's a matter really for Defence that had the lead on that rather than this portfolio.
Sure. So ITAR, though, the International Traffic in Arms Regulation, is not run by the Pentagon. That's a State Department issue. So given the peer relationship between DFAT and State Department, what role is DFAT playing in engaging with the State Department in terms of getting them on board and committed to supporting a congressional amendment to actually allow these changes to take place?
Yes, Senator. Well, this is a whole of government effort, of course, in the Australian system Defence, as you know, is responsible for military and dual-use export controls, export licensing. In the US system, it's the Department of Commerce in relation to dual-use exports and the State Department, as you note, in relation to military exports. And that's run from the Pole Mill Bureau in the Department of State. This is something that we've been putting a lot of effort in, advocating for reforms that would permit tech transfer and information sharing to facilitate not only our AUKUS partnership, not just in relation to Pillar 1 but Pillar 2, but more broadly to better facilitate our defence cooperation. That's ongoing work. There was a recent House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing at which the head of the Pole Mill Bureau, Jessica Lewis, noted that work was afoot in relation to AUKUS for a short-term trade authorisation measure that one of my colleagues might be able to speak to, and then look in the longer term in relation to legislative change to facilitate better technology transfer between Australia and the US and possibly other AUKUS partners. That's the latest as far as I'm aware.
Sure. The torpedo legislation, the truncating onerous regulations for partners and enhancing deterrence operations, that's a fantastic acronym, the torpedo legislation. Has DFAT had a brief on that by your contacts in Congress?
Our embassy has been briefed on that, of course, working very closely with relevant congressional committees and representatives.
So again, the same question I had at the start, is there any indication from your briefings as to the timing of that, the scope, in terms of whether that will go directly to addressing some of the ITAR concerns? And again, has there been any repeat of the 2017-18 machinations within the Congress where people have perhaps opposed it for whatever reason? But that certainly occurred back then. I'm just interested to know if that's occurring again now.
Senator, that's really for Defence to comment on the merits of that particular draft legislation. Certainly Congress is very active on this issue. Our embassy has likewise been very active in profiling our interest in better facilitation of technology transfer through a mutual recognition of our protective security arrangements. The Torpedo Act, as far as I'm aware, is an initiative on behalf of Congress, and I'm not aware to what extent it's in response to briefings from the administration, but it's just one of those efforts that Congress are undertaking in order to profile this issue and get progress on it. But Defence is better positioned to talk about the merits of, or not the merits, but the relevance of the issues being addressed there.
Sure. So I take your comment about Defence commenting on the merits, but you've made the point several times that DFAT is working very hard. In fact, I think one of your staff or maybe a Defence staff in Washington likened it to working through the permafrost to actually try and get outcomes there. Could you take on notice then for the committee, if you don't know offhand, what briefings our staff in Washington have had in relation to either the administration-driven initiatives around legislative reform or this initiative which has been put forward by two individual members of the Congress?
Of course, since I can do that.